Welcome to Awake to Oneness Radio. I am Caroline Chang, your host. The mission of Awake to Oneness Radio is to inspire the world to awaken to the universal truth of oneness. Science is now teaching us that all life is interconnected, that we are all one. And spirituality has been teaching us this for eons. So what you do to another person, you're literally doing to another aspect of yourself. And when mankind awakens to the truth of oneness, there will be peace on earth. Today's show topic is Extraordinary Experiences with author Emily Rodavich. Emily is here with us tonight to share with us about how she came about to write this wonderful book of hers, and we'd like to welcome Emily. Welcome, Emily, to Awake to Oneness Radio.
Well,
Emily,
thank
are you there?
Carolyn.
Okay.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Now I can, yes.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thank you for being my guest. It is my honor. It always is my honor and my pleasure whenever I have a guest come on to share their journey, to share their experiences. So please share with our listeners how you came about to write this book.
Well, the title of my book is Mystical Interludes, An Ordinary Person's Extraordinary Experiences. And speaking of journey, Caroline, mine has been a long one. I don't think I realized what was happening until later in my life. When I opened the cover of my book, I put there a quote by Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher from the 1800s, and his words are, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." Well, my life, over many years since childhood, has been frequented with mystical experiences. I grew up, Caroline, during the 40s and 50s when no ordinary person dared talk about a personal experience that wasn't considered, quote, normal, unquote. In those days, an ordinary person who tried to describe an unexplainable or extrasensory experience was immediately dubbed psycho or delusional. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't want to be ridiculed or discredited by my friends and most of my family, I kept those astonishing events to myself. I remembered each one vividly, but I kept them on the back burner without wondering whether they had any purpose and without noticing the profound ways in which they were shaping my reality. And also without realizing the richness and the depth that they contributed to my life. I guess I was too busy living my life forward in those days. Mm-hmm. But what happened was I sat down at this stage of life and decided that I should write an informal biography for my kids and my grandchildren. And what started out to be that bio for my grandchildren took a sharp turn when I came to the first event that was my first spiritual experience. And in my book, I refer to it as experiencing God, quote unquote. When I started reliving that memory, everything lit up within me. My writing flowed. After I completed that story, I automatically being...
Emily, can you share that story with our listeners?
Okay. I will. What happened was, when I was we were very poor. Both my parents survived through the Depression, through the awful poverty of the Depression. My father had to work when he was 12 years old. He was pushing a wheelbarrow in a coal mine to help support his family. And my mother also had to work, and so they were very, very hardworking, humble people. We lived in a little coal mining village, and I had no formal religious education because my grandparents on my father's side were Russian Orthodox, and my mother's parents were Roman Catholic. So my parents were married by a justice of the peace in order to avoid more family conflicts than they already had. So I used to watch and listen to my mom pray at supper and sometimes before bedtime. And I had no religious training. And I would listen as she spoke to God, our Heavenly Father, as though He were beside her. And each of her prayers was usually different. They included things that were happening in our lives and in the world. She always asked for protection for my dad in the mine and for our soldiers. And she always gave thanks for all we possessed. And her prayers made me very curious about God. When there was nothing, I had no special talents. The only remarkable thing about me when I was little was that I had an insatiable curiosity. Mm-hmm. So I was always asking her about God and so on. So she was my role model for praying. What happened was, by the time I was 7 years old, their marriage was struggling, and my mother left my dad, and my two brothers, 4-year-old and 15-month-old, and I were taken to the home of my aunt to live. My aunt had no children, and she had no patience. And so as a result, my brothers and I lived in a rather abusive environment. And life was very, very difficult for us. And I prayed, and I prayed. And I sometimes thought that God didn't hear me. But I received an answer. And I knew that He had heard. My parents got back together, Caroline, and remained together for the rest of their lives and provided a wonderful family life for us. And their gifts to us and to their grandchildren have been immeasurable. So without giving away the details of the story, that was my first experience with God. And I knew gratitude at age 7 that has stayed with me all the days of my life.
Wonderful.
So, as you can see, when I got into that story, my heart swelled. And as I wrote, I wept. And as I thought back, I could smell the acrid cigarette smoke from my aunt, and I could hear her voice, and I could feel the misery and so on. And it was very, very cathartic. So what happened was I continued to write. And when the more I wrote, the more I realized the significance of all the experiences that I had. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, let me just read a few of the questions at the introduction of my book, if I may.
Sure.
It starts with this question. Has anything like this happened to you? After praying to God, you wait for an answer. Then it comes unexpectedly into your mind. It is unexpected because it is not the answer you would have chosen for yourself. Later, you realize it was the perfect answer. Or this, the memory of a recently deceased loved one fills your thoughts. The emotional bond you shared resonates in your heart. At that moment, you hear a sound or a song that informs you that your loved one is letting you know that he or she is there. Or, by happenstance, you arrive somewhere just in time to save a person from harm or death. You feel you were guided to the location. Or, without thinking, you write out factual information you had no way of knowing beforehand. You have an unexpected vision of a past life. Or you have a life-changing near-death experience. So I have experienced all of those and even more. So those are the events that I wrote about in my book. And my purpose for being on your show is to share my thoughts about these experiences with you and your listeners, and to invite your listeners and you to share with me.
That's exactly what we do here on Awake to Oneness Radio, yes. And actually, as you were reading those questions, and I could say yes to all of them myself. Even when you mentioned about when you were a child and God answered your prayer, and the overwhelming thanks, how you felt so thankful that you remained in that moment of thanksgiving till this present moment. And that's exactly how I felt the day I brought my son home from the hospital in December of 2011, when doctors had told me earlier in that month he wasn't going to live. And I brought him home on December 30th of 2011. And when I brought him home, and I came home actually after trying to take my own life, the two of us, we came home together. And when we came home that day, there was a sense of being thankful to the point of I could never not be thankful again. You know, that I was just overwhelmed with thanks. And even when he did get ill again a few years later, in April of 2014, and he had to go back into the hospital, even as he was going into the ambulance to go back to the hospital, I said, "Thank you, God." I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I was going to bring him home again. But all I could do is say, "Thank you, God, for giving me extra time with my son." You know, I want to have even more time with him, but I cannot not thank you in this moment, even though he's on his way to the hospital. So I understand what you mean exactly.
So
yeah, when you say you felt so thankful that God answered you, and with the answer that you were hoping for and praying for, that even at such a young age you kept that thankfulness. You kept that in your heart always. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Knowing gratitude like that, and I know you agree with this, Caroline, is a gift. It's a great gift.
Yes.
To experience that. Well, shall I continue?
Oh, definitely. Yes, please.
Okay. So to move along on the background here, the more I wrote, the more I realized the significance of those experiences that I had been kept in the secret for so long, and I regretted that I kept them hidden. The more I wrote about them and the more I thought about them and evolved through them, the more I realized that they should have been strung out like diamonds and pearls because of the ways they've enriched my life. that's when my understanding took seed. I started to evolve by looking backward, as Kierkegaard said. And once I had that epiphany, I felt compelled to share my insights with others. So for that purpose, I selected 10 of my extraordinary events on the basis of their variety and decided to publish them. The most difficult task was coming up with a title. You know, you have all these stories, and what do you call the book? And one day, Mystical Interludes just popped into my head while I was taking a shower. And I have to admit that when that happened, and everything that happened afterward, from that moment on, I felt guided to complete this book and to move forward as I am now. And I want to define for you what I'm talking about. I used the word, I looked it up. Mystical means something of a spiritual nature that inspires wonder and awe. And interlude is an intervening or interruptive period of time, space, or event. So not only have I used this term for the title of my book, but I'm also coining this term to refer to events that usually defy description or explanation by the experiencer, or those events that are known to exist, let's say, outside the normal paradigm, and can't be adequately explained by science. I think that everybody has at least one mystical interlude in their lifetimes. Some of us recognize it, some don't, but in writing this book, I realize how important they are, how they can enrich our lives, how they can put us, no matter what spiritual path we're on, we can always use inspiration. We can always use guideposts. We can always use other people's experiences to move us forward and light our way. And I believe that's what these do. So
exactly. I understand. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say I understand exactly what you're saying because you did it. You followed spirit and you put it down in writing and published your book. But in a sense, I'm kind of doing that with this show. In the sense, I want people to bring people like yourself together to share their experiences, and because people can, like you say, people can hear it and then feel empowered to not be afraid to share their experiences and know that, you know, that in sharing that we also inspire others, you know, to either others that have can relate to that same experience or others that have experiences that they haven't been sharing because of, like you said, when you were growing up, you felt fearful to share these experiences. So that's, yes. So I was just confirming what you were saying, 1,000%.
Precisely, and thank you. Thank you for that support and confidence. I wanted to make clear to your listeners that I'm not a fortune teller or a channel or a psychic or a wannabe. I'm not any of these things, although there's great value in those things with the right people. And I'm not here to preach or to teach, but I'm here to share. And I want to invite you and others to share with me in my next book, Mystical Interludes 2, a collection of ordinary people's extraordinary experiences. If you've experienced a variety of mystical interludes sufficient for a book, then I encourage you to get it out there. But if you remember one or more experiences and would like to share and evolve through your own experiences and those shared by others, I encourage you to read my book, then contact me through my website, which can be reached through either mysticalinterludes.com or emilyrodavich.com. As I say to you, Caroline, when I started the book, I felt guided. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know whether to get an agent or self-publish, or I didn't know what to do. And a dear friend of mine, we were having lunch one day, and this was kind of like a shove in the back, moving me forward when I talk about guided. And this person said, "Oh, I have a friend who is an editor and a publisher," and he called his friend Penelope of Citrine Publishing, and we talked, and it took off from there. And she has really been very helpful in getting me to formulate some of my ideas. So what I'd like to tell you about is what I have come up with when I talk about these ideas, what I mean by mystical interludes. And I want your listeners to see if they identify with this. A mystical interlude can be anything. It can be very, very subtle, like a gut feeling or a quiet answer to a prayer, or it can be intense, like having a deja vu, or hearing from a deceased loved one. It can be earth-shaking, like a near-death experience, or a vision from a past life, or a vision of a person, or an out-of-body experience. It can be any of those things. Almost anything that defies explanation. And when these things happen, they often create more problems than anything else. And I think this is one of the reasons that we don't know, or sometimes we miss when they happen in our lives. We miss them completely, or perhaps they frighten us, or that kind of thing. So I'm encouraging people to kind of look back and at their own lives and ask themselves if they've ever had anything like what I describe that happened to them. So one of the first things that happens after you've had one of these experiences is that, and maybe this has happened to you, Caroline, the first thing you ask is, well, what made that happen? And the answer stumps you because you know that occurrence was beyond your mental control. Even though you felt connected to the event in your heart, you didn't make it happen. And here's a trite example. One morning you're looking for a pair of earrings to wear, and you come across a pair that a friend gave you. And you think of her, and you decide to call her that day. And then your day begins, and your thought gets lost in your head, and later, that same day, you're standing in a checkout line, and that friend taps you on the shoulder. Later, you ask yourself, what made that happen? Your mind answers, I don't know. And if you talk to somebody who's a rationalist, that person might say, your friend and you were in the same place at the same time. It's a mere coincidence. And your reaction is probably, well, it's mere when I see people I know when I'm out shopping. We are merely in the same place at the same time. But what made this meeting a coincidence was that my intention to call that particular friend occurred that very same day. It's the timing of our meeting that made the event a coincidence. Mm-hmm. Although you know you didn't make it happen, in your heart you feel somehow connected to the process. So I'm just giving you a trite example. The first question, what
mm-hmm.
made it happen?
Right.
And then you go to the next
question. Can I answer? Can I try? Can I kind of give my answer to that question? Okay.
I would love
it. Yes. My answer to that question is, in every moment of your life, mystical experiences are happening. We may not be aware of them because we're not in alignment. I believe when we are quiet, when we quiet our minds and we're in alignment with our higher self, things like that happen all the time. And we know that it is, I know on a human consciousness level, we are not doing it, but we are doing it from a higher consciousness level. And so all those things there are no coincidences. Everything happens synchronistically. And sometimes we're aware of the synchronicities because we're mindful. We're being mindful of it, and we're actually looking for those moments in every moment, in every now moment. Or sometimes we're just so busy with our lives that we are not paying attention to those things. And then when they do happen, we're like, we call it. Mankind calls it a coincidence, but there are no coincidences. Everything is designed and happening perfectly in perfect divine timing. I just want to share that.
Well, that's an awareness that you have, but as I was growing up and these things were happening, I didn't have that awareness. And that's mm-hmm. my whole point to people who say, oh, these things never happened to me, or I don't believe in those things, or, this is beyond me. You already know that. And my experiences led me to evolve into an awareness of exactly what you're expressing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I am coming at this from the other side. I agree with you now, but I did not until I gave some deep thought to these things and realized how important they were. So mm-hmm. my whole mission, Caroline, is mm-hmm. to encourage everybody not to take these things for granted. As you just said, society, in this world, we look at these things as, a coincidence. But you're aware, and you're saying to me, there is no such thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, when you really think about these things and you experience them and look at them, you start to realize that. So these experiences are pathways into consciousness and awareness.
Yes. So true. So true.
That's where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who have not really had these, and there are many who have not had anything like this, my mission is to say, really think about it. You really have, but you haven't really given it any thought, or you haven't recognized it.
Exactly.
And another thing, after you ask yourself what made it happen, the next question is, what does it mean? And that's more complicated. And when your mind responds with something like, well, how should I know? And the answer, you find your answer outside your data bank. And the question agitates you because it pushes you beyond your comfort level of thinking. You know, you don't have an answer, and you say, well, if I can't answer, the question's unimportant, don't think about it, forget about it, and that's what many of us do. And some of us, though, are able to bypass our heads and realize that the answer to what made it happen, as you know, Caroline, usually comes through our hearts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there is a different, and here's an example of what I'm talking about. And I know you can certainly identify with this. You're driving and you think of a dearly departed loved one, and you turn on the radio. And the song that you and that person loved or sang together comes on at that very moment. And you say, oh, what does this mean? And your mind answers, well, I don't know. But your heart says, you know the answer to your question. And if you can acknowledge that knowing, it is highly unlikely that you will ever forget the answer.
True.
And what that is telling you is that your loved one is near. Love is eternal. It doesn't die. You continue to love that person, and that person continues to love you. And that leads to, the more you think about that, and the more you feel it in your heart, that is a pathway to evolve spiritually. It helps you to evolve. So that's why I am writing about these and wanting to get people to talk about them and share them. And I'm hoping that a day will come where we are all spiritually evolved to the point where a term like mystical interludes will be as common as bread, white bread, where it will be a part of our reality rather than an extension or outside of what we consider our reality.
Correct.
So
I do sense definitely that that's the direction we're moving in. I mean, just having this show and having it, being able to do this show from my home weekly and speak to people that are awakening, that are evolving spiritually, and then people being able to hear this all over the world, that in itself is showing how much we're moving in that direction, because we couldn't do this maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's just everything's moving so much faster, and people are awakening to the truth of who they are, and evolving spiritually to who they are, and understanding that they are one with God. They're not separate from God. And like you said, regardless of what your religion is, regardless of what your beliefs are, but understanding that you are a part of the divine, and everything that happens is in orchestration. You're co-creating with the divine. So that knowledge and awakening to who we are as divine sparks of God, that knowledge is expanding, and I think daily more and more people are waking up to that and evolving spiritually more and more, and very quickly. I think it's happening much quicker in this day, in the times that we're in, and so it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing that you followed your heart. Your heart was telling you to put this down in a book, not, to write this book and to share it with the world and to inspire others to do the same, to inspire others to share their experiences, however it comes out for them. If it comes out for them by, if they're inspired to write a book, wonderful, or if they're inspired to paint a painting or dance, whatever their inspiration is. That's another big part of this show, is to ask our listeners to go within, tap into what your heart is inspiring you to do. Follow your passion, because when you follow your passion, that's when those synchronicities just happen day after day after day, moment after moment, because you're following your passion. You're doing what you came here to do when you do that. So that's beautiful that you did that, and by your book and other book, the next book, which you're inviting people to share, so you can even share more with the world on these mystical interludes, as you say. And it's so true, like you said, that you don't have to. I believe we all have the capability to channel if we want. We all have the capability, and actually we do. We all do channel in a sense. When you're writing and you're inspired to write, that's really channeling. And when I'm doing the show, in a sense, it's channeling, because whenever a person is following their higher self guidance, they are channeling the divine. So we all do. We don't, quote unquote, call it that, but we all do, and we all have that capability. It's just some people develop it more and have a more natural ability to do it sometimes, because sometimes people just start channeling and they didn't even try. It just happens. So that's like a natural gift, like. Yeah.
Right.
So, but it's a beautiful thing. We have a caller with a question. Oh, interesting. Okay. Would you like to take a question, Emily?
Sure.
Okay. We have a caller from 559 area code. All right. Hi, caller. 559
Hello.
area code. Hi. How are you?
How are you?
Very
I'm
good.
Thank you. Great. I actually just got just barely.
Well, who is calling? Can you please tell us your name?
Following about how we get inspired to write, and that's coming from Adino's. And I do.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. I'm missing your name.
Oh, my name's Evelyn. Can you hear me now?
Okay.
I'm Evelyn.
Now I can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I said that I called in, just barely, and so I only got to hear bits and pieces of what you said. One thing that resonated with me was that you mentioned that when we are inspired to write, it comes from a divine, intervention. And I definitely agree with you, because sometimes when I'm writing or journaling or just writing my thoughts down, I'm like, some of those words that I frequently don't use, and I often look back and reflect, and I'm like, gosh, that sure doesn't sound like me. It sounds like someone else. So it makes sense that it's probably not coming from me,
Yes, I hear what you're saying. Actually, it isn't, and it isn't in the sense that we are one with the divine. But go ahead, Emily. You share on that.
I didn't get your name.
Oh, it's Evelyn.
Evelyn, yes. I have to say that I felt the same way as I was writing. I felt exactly the same way. I would look back on something and I would think, where did that come from?
Exactly. So now we know where. Which is good. It's good to know.
Yes, it is good to know. And keep writing. I hope you're writing about mystical interludes.
I want to become an author, and I just don't know what to write about. I was thinking about writing children's stories, and then I just get sidetracked. But I think I just need to, set aside a time and just let the imagination, take over and just write away.
That sounds good. That sounds like not to pressure yourself. I mean, if your desire is to write, then that's what you should do. And don't even worry about what you write. Just write. Meaning just quiet yourself and sit in front of a piece of paper and a pen or a typewriter or a computer, however you like to write, and just let it come out. And like you said, before you know it, you'll have something that you'll be like, maybe amazed at. But if that's your passion, then follow it with all your heart.
I agree.
Thank you. I think I'm going to continue listening. I'm going to continue listening to both of you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Evelyn, for calling, and thank you for your question. Yes. But yeah, because that does inspire others to just follow their passion, whatever that is. Don't doubt yourself. If this is what your heart is telling you to do, just do it. Okay.
That's
all right.
right.
Well, thank you for calling in. Okay.
Well,
and I'm just
you.
Thank you. I'll just put you on mute for now. Okay.
Okay.
All righty. So yeah, that was a good question because that happens so many times with people. People will talk themselves out of doing what their heart, and their heart never stops. Your inspiration, your passion never stops trying to nudge you to do what is in your heart. But your mind will say, well, I can't make money doing that, or, I don't have enough resources. Your mind will come up with every reason under the sun not to follow your passion. I'm not sure if I shared with you, Emily, or if it's in my bio. I can't remember what's in my bio. I wrote my bio 2 years ago, but when I started my show, it was just an inspiration in the middle of the night, and at that time, I knew very little about internet radio. I knew there was people were starting their own internet radio shows. I didn't know how to go about it. I just Spirit told me, get up and do it, literally. And I was like, okay.
Yes.
So
I did hear you say that. I did hear you say that before. One of the things that I wanted to say to you and to point out is that you're talking about that we all channel, and Evelyn pretty much affirmed that in what she said when she called in. Now, you know that, and Evelyn knows that, and I've experienced that feeling. But my point is, if you're at a card party or if you're having dinner with friends and you say, well, I'm writing and I feel as though I'm channeling information, and I feel as though I'm being guided, or I heard from my loved one the other day. This happened to me when I think you will still get a roll of the eyes. I think that you will confuse people, and that's where I see the value of what I have to share. I think a lot of your guests, Caroline, are people who, like yourself, who are highly spiritually evolved, who are very enlightened. I feel that my awareness has been marvelously expanded through what I have experienced. And I know that these experiences, when you really stop and think about them, they are such great teachers. And if you open your mind to look at that reality, your whole reality changes. That's where you are, right?
Right, correct.
And so the people I'm talking to who are listening are ordinary people like myself. I'm a person who has lived life forward, as Kierkegaard says, and I'm understanding it by looking backward. And I've learned a lot from these. They have helped me develop my own spiritual path. I would like to look at why is it that when you're sitting in a group, a social group, and if you were to talk about these things, a lot of people get uncomfortable. They kind of want to change the subject. Why do you think that is?
Well, I understand exactly what you're saying. I listen to, when I'm in a social gathering, I listen to the conversation, and I'll share as much as I can in that environment. So first I'll listen to where they're at and where I get the feel of the space and the feel of the vibration, and I always share who I am. I'm always authentic, no matter where I am. But it's some things you just don't, you can't share fully because you know it won't be received, and they won't hear it. It will fall on deaf ears. So you share who you always be. I always encourage my listeners to be authentic, be your authentic self, share your authentic truth. But not in all settings is everything going to be, well received. But I was at a Labor Day cookout not long ago, and Labor Day, and I just, like I said, first I'm a very good listener. I'll listen first. And there was a young lady there that we started talking, and as I was talking to her, I was able to share more and more, and she was just taking it in. She was like, so it's okay when you can't, share fully in those circumstances. But always be true to yourself. Always be your authentic self. Sometimes we can't share fully in social settings because people that are there may not be ready for it, So that's the best advice I could say.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more with you about authenticity. Not at all. And I know that you cannot share everything in all settings with people, and the only way to be is yourself and authentic. I have no argument with that. I think what I'm trying to say, Caroline, is that I believe that the experiences that I'm referring to do happen in most of our lives. And I think that one of the reasons that, we didn't talk about them for so long. You're probably a lot younger than I am, Caroline. I came up through the 40s and 50s when it was absolutely taboo.
I was born in 62. 62, so 60s and 70s. I was.
That's right. So when I refer to this, I have a different background there. But anyway, I think that when these things happen to people, sometimes, they become fearful because it's something that defies explanation. It can frighten a person into slamming the door and locking it. I don't want that to ever happen again, kind of thing. And we have social taboos. It isn't normal. If it isn't normal, it might be crazy. And if it's not scientifically proven, it's not credible.
Well,
and
the wonderful thing, my awakening came from science. So science is totally changing. It's not being taught in mainstream science. Mainstream science is still teaching the science when you were in elementary school. But science has totally changed. Science, quantum physics, is saying all of life is interconnected. And quantum physics really is what opened my mind and my heart and gave me the understanding of spirituality that I've been studying for 40 years. It took science, it took quantum physics to really have me understand it. So modern day science is quite different than and it's still not, even though it's modern science, it's not being taught in mainstream science classes today. So that's the thing. But you were saying, oh goodness, I lost my train of thought. But you were saying just before that, you were saying, oh goodness, I'm sorry. The reasons that
these things are not they're not shared openly. They're not talked about openly. And I this is what I'm hoping will come about. When I agree with you. I'm familiar with quantum physics and the way that everything is energy and everything, the difference between the particle and the wave and energy is both, etc.
Exactly.
But yes, I'm familiar with all that, but everybody isn't, and and people have these personal experiences, and in a workaday world, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to read up on quantum physics or even think about these things.
Well, the truth of it, the taboos that I understand the taboos you're talking about, but those taboos are starting to, day by day, they're not as taboo as they used to be. You know what I'm saying? You and I grew up in different eras, and each generation, it's becoming less and less taboo with each new generation, because now
you're right
more and
about
more
that.
People, yes, more and more people are open to it. So even I shared with you before the show started that I actually had a conversation with my son who crossed over, who transitioned 2.5 years ago. I have him on audio tape from 2 weeks ago. And it's just amazing. And I shared it with everybody I know. Whether you believe, I have physical proof. I had a conversation with my son. His voice, you can't make out what he's saying, but you can definitely hear his voice on tape. So I have physical proof of it. So I'm like, I don't, I'm at the point in my life where I don't care what people think. I'm going to be me. I'm going to share. I shared that audio with several of my friends. Only one or two gave me like a thumbs up on it, I'm like, okay, well, but yeah, so I do hear what you're saying, but the wonderful thing is that the taboos are not. The taboos are breaking down. They're not as taboo as it used to be. In every new generation, it's less and less taboo to talk about these things. So I
couldn't agree more.
I think in any gathering, you will find one or two people in a gathering that would be very fascinated to share with. So that's why I'll walk around the room and listen to conversations, and then I'll usually Spirit will lead me to a person or lead that person to me where I could have a conversation with. So because at the last event I was at, a cookout, I ended up having a 2-hour conversation with a young lady about all of this. And I didn't plan on it happening. It just happened because she naturally was gravitating towards me, and I gravitated towards her. We started talking, and our conversation evolved into one of this nature. So I think it in today's society, it's actually these conversations are even taking place in the boardroom, in the lunchroom, on jobs, at work, in a company. These conversations are taking place all over now. They truly are. So we're living in an amazing age. So it's all good. It's all good. Yes, but I love that your book is inspiring those that might still be afraid to share. So I love that.
That's my point.
Yes.
Yes. I know that there are many people. I agree with you that times are changing, that the social taboos are evaporating, dissipating, and a lot of times religion can condition us to a view of the world that it kind of puts boxes us in, I suppose. But everybody doesn't really. I know that everybody doesn't really realize that they are a part of the oneness, that we can rise above the stresses of daily life. Everybody has his own perception. I have a little story about that. I'd like to share it with you. A hunter took his new hunting dog out on a trial hunt, and he shoots a duck, and the duck falls into a lake, and the dog walks across the water, and the dog repeats that several times, and the man is flabbergasted. So the next morning, the man takes his neighbor to the lake for a shoot, and the man shoots a duck, and it falls into the water, and the duck walks on the water and retrieves the duck, and they shoot several, and the dog walks on the water several times. And finally, unable to contain himself, the hunter looks at his neighbor and he says, "Did you notice anything strange about that dog?" And the neighbor thinks for a minute and he says, "Yes, I did. The son of a gun can't swim." So
that's cute.
That's my point. That we have so many different ways of perceiving these things, and my whole point, Caroline, is that through these many experiences, they've enriched my life so much. I mean, they've changed my reality to the point where I realize, as you do, that we are not separate. We are all connected as one, and that life is eternal, and our reason for being is love. And we don't stop loving those who leave this human form, and they don't stop loving us. And it also erased my fear of death, because I've learned that there is no death. There's only transition.
That's
right.
That's all.
And it made me unafraid of most things because I'm even prone to risk taking. They freed me to be content and grateful. There are so many. We are evolving, and I agree with you. We're able to talk about these things more, but there are so many of us who aren't, or have so many stresses of life that can be changed just by recognizing those things within them. As you know, Caroline, it all has to come from within.
Yes, that's so true. That's so true. And I do understand what you're saying about those that have not awakened yet. But I also know that time is an illusion. So they will all awaken eventually. It doesn't matter when. But we'll all awaken to the truth of who we are. And the time doesn't matter. So those who are not awake now and can't understand this and are, kind of going through their own stresses and even because my definition of pain and suffering is just resisting what is. I love the book by Byron Katie, Love What Is, the isness of it. We don't have to label the isness bad or good. It just is, and love it. Like I said, like you said, when you were 7 years old, you were thankful in that moment, and that thankful, you never let that go. And the same thing with me. I understand that being thankful in every now moment, regardless of what's happening in my reality, I'm thankful. And I know that there are a lot of people who are not there, but then I don't have to really be too concerned about them because I know they're not separate from me. I know they are one with God, even if they don't know that they're not separate and they're one with God, even if they are not in their human consciousness aware of it. I know that they will one day awaken to this truth. So it doesn't matter when they awaken. All I have for them is love. So I just try to show everybody in every now moment, whether they're awakened to the truth of who they are they're waking up, are they completely asleep, totally asleep to who they are. It's okay. I love you regardless because I know that you are a divine spark of God, and one day you are, because time, it doesn't matter what day, one day you will awaken to the truth of who you are. So I think I understand what you're saying. So those of us who are awake, we can't fret too much about, because this reality isn't real anyway. It's just an experience, and it's an experience that we're creating, and our higher selves are creating each moment for a reason. So all the challenges that everyone is going through, every challenge is a blessing. Count it all joy. The challenges are there to help wake you up. So every challenge is a blessing. So when I see others that are not awakened yet and they're really struggling, I just send them love and light and know that they will awaken in perfect divine timing.
I agree with you, Caroline. And I just want to leave you with my final thoughts on this, and that is that, excuse me, we were talking about coincidence earlier, and speaking of science as well, Albert Einstein said that coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. And that definition resonates with me, but not just in reference to coincidence, but also to mystical interludes. I believe that one of the ways that our Creator or the universe or consciousness, source, whatever name you choose, I believe communicates with us and teaches us through many different mystical interludes. And it's my belief that they happen for the purpose of waking us up to the reality of oneness and source. And I see a mystical interlude as a brief visit from or to the realm of divine reality. When one of these things happens, it intrudes upon your lassitude like a benign electrical current and prods us to awaken. And whether we awaken or not is our own choice to make.
Yes.
Now, I don't preach, and I don't, I'm not a teacher of spirituality, and I don't run seminars, or I don't have any intention of doing so. But my whole purpose for being on your show and for writing my book is to share those valuable experiences for the purpose of I want to encourage others to do the same. And after remaining silent for most of my years, I'm committed to doing my small part to bring the mystical interludes of other ordinary people out of hiding. I believe that if we can share and publicize our experiences and the ways they've enriched our lives, our stories can raise the consciousness of society and eventually the world, and it is going in that direction. And I think that any help it comes from the divine. And are you familiar with Anthony DeMello by any chance?
No, the name doesn't ring a bell.
He was a Jesuit priest and spiritual teacher. He was from the East, and he might have been Indian. But he was a Catholic Jesuit, and he pretty much evolved into a more global spiritual view of things. And I think that stories of other people, of these mystical experiences that are so connected, are communications to us. I think that those stories can have a tremendous impact. These were his words. DeMello said that a lost coin is found by means of a candle. The deepest truth is found by means of a simple story.
Yes. So true. So true. So true. And I'd say the same thing. I always say I'm not a teacher. My purpose for this show is just to inspire. So you're inspiring with your wonderful book, and I'm hoping to inspire with this show. So definitely, I know that Divine is happy when we do this. Yes, the Divine is happy when we do this. So let's share again with our listeners how they can find you. Can you share your website again for our listeners?
I certainly will. Those of you who are would like to share, please go to my website, mysticalinterludes.com or emilyrodavich.com, and so we can have a conversation and see the best way for you to share your stories. And through our collective stories, perhaps we can change others and help others to get on the path and find the kind of contentment and happiness that is available to all of us.
Yes, so true, so true. Well, thank you so much, Emily. Thank you so much for being my guest. Thank you so much for the book, which is inspiring others to share their story and to also not feel like they can't share it, to share with the world and to share with you, and your second book will be out soon. Before you know it, you'll have enough material to share again.
I certainly will, Caroline.
Yes.
And I thank you so much for this opportunity to share, Caroline. It's been very enjoyable.
It's my pleasure and my honor. Thank you so much. Well, you have a great weekend. I know we're both you're on the western side of Pennsylvania. I'm eastern Pennsylvania. We're in the same state. But you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Say hi to Penelope.
Penelope. I will do that. Bye now.
Okay. All right. Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.